After the headache that was the Warriors of Chaos and the god-honest pre-patch migraine-inducing Beastmen, Creative Assembly didn't exactly have a great track record, but soon after they would push out yet another DLC, being the first Lord pack, which instead of adding a new race would just bolster the original race's Lord roster. Would this DLC succeed in bringing needed variety and, well, fun to Warhammer 1, or was it doomed to fail like its predecessors? I guess it's about time to find that out.
Only one can win in this ageless war.
On the 1st of September 2016, Total Warhammer players were given a new DLC to purchase, The Grim and the Grave. Like said previously, instead of adding a new race like the previous two DLCs, this pack would instead add new legendary lords to the current races. In this case, it would bolster both the Vampire Count's and the Empire Count's legendary lord choice. Before we continue, I think it's fair to temper expectations. This DLC doesn't really add any new gameplay choices. It really was just a roster addition, so comparatively to the newer DLC and even free DLCs, there isn't much to review because there isn't much new content in general. Regardless, the easiest way to continue this would be to split up the remainder of this review into each faction, so without further ado, the Empire. The Empire was given one new legendary lord, a new lord type, a new hero, and 3 units. Volkmar the Grim has quite a weird position because just like Cody Bonds says, he plays as a second fiddle Karl Franz. Nowadays, new legendary lords are given their own unique faction, like how Throt the Unclean was given Clan Molder instead of, let's say, being in Clan Moors. Volkmar doesn't exactly have this distinction. Even though canonically he is the Grand Theogenist of the Empire, he doesn't really have too much unique about him to justify playing him over Karl Franz besides for the admittedly interesting battle aspect. He still has the same starting position and equally the same problems as Karl Franz, except now with a side of tedium as the quest for his unique items take him to Kislev, which now bolsters Clan Molder, and Skaven are not exactly what Volkmar is adept at killing. See, Volkmar is a more jacked up Arch-Lector, which is the new lord type and also the new hero added in this DLC, except he buffs them from a War Altar of Sigmar. He's able to buff using battle prayers, which are character-bound cooldown skills that can give combat buffs to allies or heavy damage dealing bombardment spells against enemies. Volkmar does buff up one of the new units, Flagellants. It's commonly said that no other legendary lord buffs up a unit as much as Volkmar buffs Flagellants. Sadly, they're still Flagellants, dying by a mere breeze, recruitable at tier 3, prone to high casualty rates, and generally a weak unit both due to the prevalence of missiles fielded by the enemy and also that you should be fielding archers yourself rather than melee infantry. They are unbreakable damage dealers and are anti-infantry to boot, which makes them really good chaff clearers. Overall makes sense as the counterpart to this DLC is a Vampire Count Lord, which as many people know, field quite a lot of chaff. The other 2 units being brought to the game are Free Company Militia and Knights of the Blazing Sun. I don't really have anything interesting to say about Free Company Militia because they are uninteresting and barely ever recruited. Low-range skirmish gunpowder units means they need line of sight and can only get 1 or 2 volleys off before whatever was going to slap them does. Knights of the Blazing Sun, however, are a great choice for crumbling whatever is in front of them. A hefty charge bonus backed by high weapon strength means they have quite the impact and are basically kryptonite to chaff and regenerating enemies. Can't help but feel like these new additions don't really add anything to increase what the Empire is good at, which is a little of everything. The skirmish units aren't anything to stand out, nor do they fill a specific niche. Knights of the Blazing Sun, while powerful and fun to use, are only recruitable from Talabheim and again have a slightly weaker alternative being Empire Knights, or go one step further and get Reiksguard. The one unit that actually adds something is the Flagellants, which don't remedy the overall case of shitty Empire infantry that really slogs them the entire game as they don't have an infantry that surpasses tier 3. The one last thing I need to touch on is Regiments of Renown. Think of these as jacked up versions of their base game counterparts. This is slightly worth it as more powerful Hellstorm rocket batteries and Dummy Griff Knights are enough to get me to buy a DLC. In base game, you are only limited to having 1 unit of these campaign wide, but with mods this can be easily changed if you choose to do so. I had an oddly large amount to say about Volkmar, but I've got next to nothing to say about Gorst. He again is a more powerful version of a hero, being a cracked out necromancer. He rides a more pimped out corpse cart and can summon grave guards and even white kings with his spells, but he again is just a cracked out necromancer, which is objectively the worst lord type as they can't hold their own in melee, and Gorst is no exception. This DLC also added a different lord type, being the Strigoi Ghoul King. This was fine originally, but nowadays with the bloodlines to awaken more powerful versions of lords with better skills, the Strigoi has been rendered basically obsolete. The only two other units being added were the Corpse Cart and the Mortis Engine. These are fine, I guess. The heal and buff units and their radius, sometimes giving minor amounts of melee attack and melee defense, but only the Mortis Engine and its renowned counterpart can really deal out damage. Forrest again is not a great addition because just like Volkmar, he plays second fiddle to someone fitting of the legendary title, in this case being Manfred von Karstein. And when you have a magic and melee powerhouse like Manfred, who has better starting units and better mount options, you really start to ask yourself, what's the point of starting as Gorst? And to that I literally have zero answer. I wouldn't say this DLC falls into being as bad as the previous two, but it still asks for a little too much in terms of price comparatively to the content it gives. Each lord isn't exactly unique and plays as a more powerful version of an existing lord archetype, and both play second fiddle to more powerful legendary lords. In Gorst's case, his defeat trait being more useful than he is. While I didn't have a specifically bad time and even had a lot of fun with both of these campaigns, I wouldn't say that was the main benefit of the DLC, as it didn't change anything gameplay wise. While I did force myself to use the new lords as much as possible, the new units added, especially the vampire counts, I didn't find myself using very often because they were so meh. For $8 you can definitely spend your money better elsewhere. Or if you're still prevalent in putting your cash into Total Warhammer, there are way better DLCs coming in the future. Needless to say, I don't give this DLC any kind of recommendation. This is going to slot into the look for a sale kind of DLCs. I am in a better mood though, especially because this DLC wasn't as much of a slog as the former two. Hopefully this streak will continue with the review for the King and the Warlord. See you then.